Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Donald Trump's recent statements about the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
You know what he's been saying about it.
Right, yeah.
A lot of people are talking about this, so we thought it would be a good idea to take a deep dive.
It's a fascinating one.
Yeah, we've got a lot of different sources to look at.
Absolutely.
We've got, news articles, we've got historical accounts of the canal's construction,
Yeah.
and we even have some of Trump's own social media posts.
Right, from the horse's mouth, as they say.
That's right.
Primary sources.
And what I think is really interesting is that, when you start reading all of this stuff, you realize that there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the U.S. actually gave up control of the canal decades ago.
A lot of people don't know that. They think we still run the thing.
Right. And this was a huge engineering feat. I mean, rife with challenges.
Oh, yeah.
Loss of life.
Disease.
Yeah.
A lot of obstacles.
Yeah. And, this story involves a bit of international intrigue and even accusations of ripoffs. So
Always fun.
it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
All right, so to kick things off, let's get everybody up to speed on exactly what Trump is saying.
Yeah.
He's been posting on Truth Social, and he's been claiming that Panama is charging the U.S. these exorbitant fees for ships using the canal.
Right.
He's calling it a ripoff. And he's also questioning the 1977 treaty that handed control of the canal to Panama,
Yeah.
suggesting it was a bad deal for the U.S.
Which is interesting because to understand why he's making these claims now requires a little bit of historical background.
Yeah.
Because did you know that the U.S. actually built the Panama Canal in the early 1900s?
That's right.
And we controlled a whole zone around it?
The canal zone?
Yeah.
For decades.
It's true. But we gave up that control in 1999.
Yeah.
So when Trump talks about taking back the canal, it's raising eyebrows.
Yeah, it's not really.
It ignores decades of history and international agreements. It's kind of a non-starter.
Yeah, he's even brought China into the mix.
Of course.
Suggesting they might be gaining influence over the canal.
Right, which kind of plays into, that very real anxiety, I think, that's out there in the world today.
Yeah.
About the growing economic and political power of China.
Yeah.
Are they going to take over the Panama Canal?
No.
Are they going
Not
to,
going to be in charge?
control world shipping?
So what we're going to do in this deep dive is give you all of the context to understand what's really going on here.
Yeah.
We're going to untangle fact from fiction
Mm.
and help you figure out what's a legitimate concern and what might be political maneuvering.
Exactly.
So first, let's rewind the clock.
Good.
The story of the Panama Canal actually starts long before the U.S. even got involved.
Way back.
We're talking centuries ago.
Yeah, imagine this. It's the 1500s, and Spanish explorers are navigating the treacherous waters around South America.
Yeah.
And they realized that a shortcut across the narrowest point of the continent would be a game changer for trade and travel.
Right. I mean, makes sense.
Yeah, it would cut weeks or even months off their journeys.
So the idea of a canal through Panama was born.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just a matter of digging a ditch.
Yeah.
This was a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
In fact, the first serious attempt came in the late 1800s.
Okay.
And it was led by a French company that had successfully built the Suez Canal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they thought we can do this again.
They had the experience.
Yeah, they had the expertise,
Yeah.
but they severely underestimated the challenges.
Oh.
Yeah,
So the French just abandoned this massive project.
pretty much.
How did the U.S. get involved?
Well, the French project was a colossal failure,
Oh.
just plagued by disease engineering problems and financial mismanagement.
Oh, so it was a combination of things.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm of terrible circumstances.
Wow.
Thousands of workers died from yellow fever and malaria.
Oh, gosh.
It was really tragic. The company went bankrupt, leaving behind a half-finished canal and a legacy of tragedy.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I think it's an important lesson
Yeah.
for all of us. It just shows how even the most brilliant engineering minds can be humbled by nature and unforeseen challenges.
That's right. It's a stark reminder of the risks involved in these mega projects.
Absolutely.
But this failure created an opportunity for the U.S., right?
It did.
I mean, we were starting to emerge as a global power, and a canal under our control seemed pretty appealing.
Very appealing.
Yeah.
The U.S. saw the strategic value of a canal across Central America.
Uh-huh.
It would allow our Navy to move quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific,
Right.
and it would boost American trade.
Of course.
So at the turn of the 20th century, the U.S. stepped in, purchased the French assets, and took on the monumental task of finishing the canal.
Okay, so we've got the U.S. eager to flex their engineering muscles.
Yeah.
But wasn't there some controversy about how they secured the rights to build the canal in the first place?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
This is where the story takes a bit of a political turn, and this history is key to understanding the current situation.
Okay.
At the time, Panama was part of Colombia,
Oh.
and Colombia wasn't exactly thrilled about the U.S. controlling such a strategically important piece of land.
Yeah, so how did the U.S. get around that?
Well, let's just say the U.S. used its naval power to influence events,
Okay.
backing a Panamanian independence movement.
Wow.
Shortly after Panama declared independence, with a little help from their new American friends, the U.S. secured the rights to the canal project through a treaty.
Okay, so now that we understand how the canal was built, let's examine why Panama wasn't happy about it.
Okay. Host speaker.
Yeah.
That treaty, while giving the U.S. the green light to build the canal, also established the Panama Canal Zone,
Uh-huh.
a 10-mile wide strip of land under U.S. control.
Oh, wow.
And that, my friend, became a major point of contention for Panama.
I can imagine having a foreign power control a chunk of your country, even if it's for something as important as a canal, has got to be frustrating. Exactly. It was seen as a symbol of U.S. imperialism and an infringement on Panama's sovereignty.
Right.
Panamanians living in the canal zone often faced discrimination and unequal treatment compared to U.S. citizens living there.
So even though the canal was this marvel of engineering, it came at a cost for Panama.
It did. There were definitely some downsides.
And this history matters because it explains why Trump's making these claims now.
Yeah, it's tapping into a long history of resentment.
Right.
Now let's fast forward a bit.
Okay.
The U.S. finished the Panama Canal in 1914.
Okay.
It was a huge accomplishment, dramatically shortening shipping routes between the Atlantic and Pacific.
Yeah, for sure.
But those tensions with Panama continued to simmer
Yeah.
and eventually boiled over in the 1960s with riots and protests.
Oh, wow.
Panamanians were demanding more control over their own destiny.
Okay, so now the U.S. is facing a dilemma.
They are.
They've got this vital strategic asset, but it's becoming a source of conflict. What happened next?
This brings us to a pivotal moment, the 1977 Torrijos-Carter treaties.
These treaties were a major turning point, recognizing Panama's sovereignty over the canal zone
Okay.
and setting a timetable for the gradual transfer of control back to Panama.
So the U.S. finally agreed to give up control. Was that a difficult decision?
Well, it was a complex process involving years of negotiations.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this was during the Cold War,
Yeah.
and there were concerns about the canal's security and the potential for Soviet influence in the region.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the U.S. recognized that holding onto the canal zone was becoming more trouble than it was worth.
And this is the treaty that Trump is now questioning, claiming it was a bad deal for the U.S.
That's right. He seems to be suggesting that the U.S. gave away too much and got too little in return. But it's important to note that the treaty was ratified by the U.S. Senate with bipartisan support.
Okay.
It was seen by many as a way to improve relations with Latin America and address a long-standing injustice.
Okay, so the treaty was signed, and Panama started getting more control over the canal. When did they fully take over?
The final transfer of control happened in 1999.
Okay.
So for the past 25 years, the Panama Canal has been entirely under Panamanian management.
That's important to remember, especially when we hear Trump talking about taking back the canal.
Right.
It's just not that simple.
It would be a violation of international law
Mm-hmm.
and would likely trigger a major diplomatic crisis.
Right.
But I think what Trump's rhetoric is really highlighting is a deeper anxiety about America's place in the world.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
Well, for much of the 20th century, the U.S. was the dominant global power.
Right.
We had the strongest military, the biggest economy,
Mm-hmm.
and we exerted a lot of influence around the world.
Yeah.
But in recent decades, that dominance has been challenged, particularly by the rise of China.
So you're saying that Trump's pronouncements about the Panama Canal are part of a broader narrative about America losing its grip on global power?
I think there's an element of that. It's a way of appealing to a certain segment of the population that feels nostalgic for a time when America was unequivocally number one.
Yeah.
But it's also important to understand that the world is a much more complex place now.
Right.
Power is more diffuse, and countries like China are playing an increasingly important role on the global stage.
That makes sense. And this brings us back to the present day. The Panama Canal is still a vital waterway for global trade, and the U.S. is still a major user. But there are new challenges emerging, right? I've been reading about these drought issues impacting the canal.
You're right, the drought has been a major problem. The Panama Canal relies on a system of locks that raise and lower ships between the ocean and a man-made lake.
Right.
That lake is fed by rainfall.
Uh-huh.
And with the drought, the water levels have dropped significantly.
So how is that impacting things?
Well, it's forcing the Panama Canal Authority to impose restrictions on ships.
Okay.
For example, they've had to limit how deep a ship can sit in the water, which is known as its draft.
Oh, right.
That means some larger ships have to carry less cargo or even wait for the water levels to rise.
So this drought is causing delays and increasing costs for shipping companies.
Precisely. And that has ripple effects throughout the global economy.
Wow.
Think about it. Everything from consumer goods to raw materials are transported through the Panama Canal.
Uh-huh.
So any disruption there can impact prices and supply chains around the world.
Wow, that's a great point. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
And this is a reminder for you, even in our hyper-connected global economy, events on the other side of the world can have a real impact on your daily life.
That's true.
You know, we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
What happens in one place affects us all.
But this drought is also highlighting another factor that's changing the dynamics around the Panama Canal, the growing influence of China.
Absolutely. Remember Trump mentioning that a Chinese company is managing ports near the canal?
Yes.
Well, that company is Hutchison Ports,
Mhm.
a Hong Kong-based conglomerate that's one of the largest port operators in the world.
Wow.
And their presence in Panama is a sign of China's growing economic footprint in the region.
Okay, so now we've got all these pieces of the puzzle. The history of U.S. involvement in the Panama Canal, the current challenges posed by the drought, and the rise of China as a global economic power.
Right.
Let's put those pieces together and analyze Trump's claims. Does he have a point about Panama ripping off the U.S. with exorbitant fees? Is he justified in questioning the 1977 treaty? And what about his warnings about China's influence?
Those are the key questions we'll unpack next. Remember, we're aiming to give you a clear and balanced understanding of the situation so you can form your own informed opinion.
Okay, so let's tackle these Trump claims one by one. He keeps saying that Panama is charging U.S. ships these exorbitant fees to use the canal. What's the reality there?
Well, first off, it's important to understand that the Panama Canal is a business.
Yeah,
Just like any other service, they charge fees to generate revenue.
makes sense.
That money goes towards maintenance operations and future investments, to keep the canal running smoothly.
Right. So it's not like they're just like pulling these fees out of thin air.
Exactly. The Panama Canal Authority has a very detailed system for calculating tolls. It's all based on the size and type of vessel, and it's completely transparent. Anyone can look up the fee structure online.
Okay, so no secret deals or special treatment for certain countries.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The system is designed to be fair and consistent for everyone, regardless of where the ship is from. And remember, the U.S. is still the canal's biggest customer.
Right.
So we're talking about a significant chunk of their revenue.
But didn't a Japanese shipping company pay like almost $4 million on top of the regular fees just to get through the canal quickly?
You're talking about the auction they held during the drought.
Yeah.
With the water levels so low, they had to limit the number of ships passing through each day. So they started auctioning off slots for ships that needed to get through urgently.
So it was like supply and demand, the limited capacity drove up the price.
Precisely. But that's not the norm. Most ships just pay the standard tolls, which, while not cheap, are generally in line with what other major canals charge.
Okay, so maybe exorbitant fees is a bit of an exaggeration. What about Trump's argument that the 1977 treaty was a bad deal for the U.S., that we gave away too much?
This is where things get a little more complex. Remember that treaty was a product of its time. The U.S. was facing pressure from Panama and the international community to give up control of the canal zone, and there was a growing recognition that holding on to it was damaging our relationships in the region.
Right, but from Trump's perspective, it sounds like he sees it as a symbol of American weakness, surrendering a strategic asset.
And that narrative might resonate with some people, but it's important to remember that the treaty was approved by the U.S. Senate. It wasn't some backroom deal. And it included provisions for the U.S. to defend the canal's neutrality, meaning we still have a vested interest in its security.
So it wasn't a complete abandonment of American interests. We just shifted from direct control to a partnership with Panama.
Exactly, and that partnership has been largely successful. The canal has operated smoothly under Panamanian management, and global trade has continued to flow through it.
Speaking of global trade, let's talk about China. Trump has hinted that they're trying to gain control of the canal through their business dealings in Panama. How much truth is there to that?
It's true that China has been investing heavily in infrastructure projects around the world, including in Panama, and they do operate a couple of major ports near the canal.
But that doesn't automatically mean they're pulling the strings, right?
Correct. It's important to distinguish between commercial activity and government control. The Panama Canal Authority, which is run by Panama, remains firmly in charge of the canal's operations, and they've repeatedly stated that they're committed to maintaining its neutrality, meaning it's open to ships from all countries.
So China might be increasing their economic influence in the region, but they're not running the Panama Canal.
Exactly. Now, that doesn't mean the U.S. should ignore China's growing presence in Panama. It's something to be aware of and to monitor. But it's also important to avoid falling into a Cold War mentality where every move by China is seen as a threat.
Right. We need to be strategic and engage with China constructively while also protecting our own interests.
Absolutely. So after examining Trump's claims, we see a bit of a disconnect between his rhetoric and the reality on the ground. The Panama Canal is a complex issue, intertwined with history, geopolitics, and economics.
And as we've seen, it's a story that's still unfolding: the drought, China's growing influence, the need for continued investment in the canal's infrastructure. These are all factors that will shape the future of this vital waterway.
And for you, the listener, understanding these complexities is crucial because as global citizens, we're all impacted by what happens at the Panama Canal, even if we never set foot there.
That's a great point. So, to wrap things up, I think we've accomplished our mission. You now have a deeper understanding of the Panama Canal, the history behind it, the current challenges, and the political dynamics at play.
And hopefully you're feeling a bit more informed and equipped to navigate the complexities of this globalized world. Remember, critical thinking is key. Don't just accept everything you hear at face value. Dig deeper, ask questions, and form your own conclusions.
Excellent advice. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all of this new information. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.